Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's summit on fair work on digital platforms. My name is Dalia Gabriel, and I will be your moderator for today. This event is about striving for fairness in a changing world of work. Digital platforms are transforming what work looks like for a growing number of people around the world. But creating a fair deal for workers remains central to building a thriving economy, an economy that works well for all. To do this, we need a range of international stakeholders and experts to work together to make this a reality. Today's summit is about doing just that. We will be joined by representatives from government, trade unions, and the academic community who will collectively ask, what does fair work mean in the platform economy? And what are the concrete ways we can ensure that fairness stays at the heart of this dynamic world of work for years to come? Reflecting on these questions, we have two incredible panels made up of experts from around the world. Viewers at home will also have the opportunity to ask questions of the panelists, and you can do that by submitting questions and comments using the Q&A tool. Before we turn to our panels, we are thrilled to be joined by State Secretary Dr. Bärbel Koffler from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. We would especially like to take this opportunity to thank the Ministry for their partnership and funding of the Fairwork Project, who are hosting today's event. We will also be joined later in the day by Anna Dujic, who will be representing State Secretary Ms. Lilian Chan from the Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs here in Germany. To kick off today's proceedings, we now turn to State Secretary Dr. Bärbel Koffler for her opening remarks, which will contextualise today's discussions.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, more and more people are suffering in a humanitarian, economic, or social downward spiral because of global challenges such as climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, conflicts and wars. Poverty is rising, and with it inequality. One thing is very clear. The Sustainable Development Goals and the goals from the Paris Agreement can now only be achieved with true leaps in development. Digital technology can do a lot to make that happen. It is a driver of innovation and enables actors in all areas to network globally. Digital solutions and tools are changing the world at a tremendous pace. Some 5 billion people are using the internet worldwide. That is 2/3 of the world's population. Digital transformation thus has the potential to help us achieve the development goals in a more efficient and effective way and improve the lives of many people. Development cooperation wants to exploit these opportunities even more. A central aim is to put people at the center of a fair and sustainable digital transformation. That means the aim is for people and nature worldwide, and especially in the countries of the Global South, to benefit from digital development. That is why the BMZ is promoting a fair and sustainable digital transformation in various areas. This also includes action to promote fair work in the platforms economy. The platform economy is creating unimagined opportunities for employment. Work is becoming more flexible, both in terms of time and space. Uncomplicated work placement via digital marketplaces lowers the threshold for entering the labor market. This makes it easier, in particular, for young people and women to get a first foothold into the labor market. The platform economy is giving rise to new business models, bringing along new risks linked with platform work. Poor and in part dangerous working conditions and unfair pay are very common. There is a lack of international standards. Many platform workers, therefore, have no social protection when contracts are suddenly cancelled. Women providing household-related services are especially exposed to the risks linked with platform work. We need to counter these risks And that is why the BMZ is committed to achieving higher working standards on platforms worldwide, for instance with the help of the Fairwork Project. We have already achieved a great deal with this project. Different platforms in countries from India to South Africa have raised pay levels from minimum wages to living wages. Contracts are now formulated in a way that the workers can actually understand them. By the end of next year, the Fairwork Project will assess platforms in 24 countries that employ more than 20 million people and advises them on implementing higher working standards. Achieving long-term success and international standards will, however, require a change in political and regulatory strategies. The EU Commission has taken an important step in that direction by putting forward its proposal for a directive on improving working conditions in platform work. The BMZ will further deepen its cooperation on this and other issues, such as the future of work with politics, academia, the private sector, and non-governmental organizations worldwide, to achieve a fair and sustainable digital transformation. I'm convinced that today's event will make its contribution to that. I wish you every success.
Remarks, a great way to start today's proceedings. We will now hear from Professor Mark Graham. Professor Graham is the founder and director of Fairwork. Based at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute and the VZB Berlin Social Science Centre, the Fairwork Project brings together key stakeholders to set minimum fair work standards for the gig economy. With established partnerships in nearly 40 countries, the project has already influenced several platforms to change their working practices, whether it's increasing wages, creating fairer contracts, or recognizing worker associations. To tell us more about this work, we now turn to Professor Graham.
Thank you, Dalia, and a really warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today. As Dalia said, my name is Mark Graham. I'm a professor at the University of Oxford's Oxford Internet Institute and director of the Fairwork Project. And what I'd like to do is use this opportunity to just tell you all a bit about the Fairwork Project. So Fairwork is an international research project. We're based at the University of Oxford in the UK and the Berlin Social Science Centre in Germany. And what we do around the world is we collaborate closely with workers, with platforms, with advocates, and with policymakers to envision and to build a fairer future of work. And through a global network of researchers based in 39 countries on 5 continents, what Fairwork does is evaluate digital platforms' working conditions, and we rank them based on 5 principles of fair work. So our project started, and it was grounded in years of research that I was leading at the Oxford Internet Institute into how platform work is experienced by workers. And in that research that we did, what my team and I discovered were a whole range of risks and harms that are experienced by platform workers. What sorts of risks and harms am I talking about? Well, first of all, around pay. Platform workers in most places, on most platforms, they tend to be classified as independent contractors. And so what that means is that they tend not to be employees of platform companies. If you're not an employee, that means that in most places it's possible, and indeed it's entirely legal, to pay you below the minimum wage. Second, around working conditions. So a lot of platform work is inherently risky. Delivery drivers weave in and out of traffic all day. Ride-hail drivers can be assaulted. Cleaners have to go into the homes of strangers. And if something goes wrong, if you can't work on many platforms, you just get no income. COVID has only amplified these risks. So workers face a double precarity, the risk of illness by doing jobs that can't really be done in a socially distanced way, and the financial risks of losing your livelihood with no safety net, no sick pay, if you're struck down by the virus. Third, management. So there's usually no meaningful due process when it comes to disciplinary or dismissal procedures, and this tends to especially affect minority and migrant workers. And workers who depend on a platform, they can be kicked off the app without any sort of fair due process if they get low ratings on a lot of platforms. Fourth, individualization. So there are emerging trade unions and associations around the world doing extremely important work, organizing platform workers and trying to hold platform companies to account. But overall, in most places, in most sectors, most platform workers just don't have the sort of collective associational structural power that we see in other sectors of the economy. So they're in a structurally weak bargaining position. And this allows platforms, if they choose to unilaterally degrade wages and working conditions. So as a reaction to these risks and these harms, what we set out to do in the Fairwork Project is shed a light on how work is experienced in the platform economy. What we do in the project is we co-develop a set of Fair Work principles with the people and with the organizations that they impact on, so with workers and with platforms. We then carry out research to evaluate platforms against those principles, and then we use that research to give every platform a score out of 10, a Fair Work score that's a score out of 10, and I'll explain a bit more about this in a few minutes. So we started the project in 2018, thanks to the support of the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, and the Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, the GIZ, who have been generously supporting us ever since. We currently work in 39 countries. Many of our teams in the Global North fund themselves, whereas the coordination infrastructure, including our secretariat, which is based in Berlin, and the funding for 25 of our Global South teams, this comes from the BMZ. Some of our Global North teams, we would thank different funders there, such as the Ford Foundation for our US project, the Austrian Chamber of Labor for our Austria project. I won't mention them all here, but we're also very grateful for their support. Now, in each one of these countries that I just mentioned, what we do is we evaluate platforms against the 5 Fair Work principles. These principles were developed at a tripartite workshop that we initially held at the ILO, and we've since been refining these principles based on in-country consultations with stakeholders around our network. Now, these principles, they don't represent a gold-plated understanding of what work should be. Instead, they're really just basic minimum standards. They stipulate that no worker, irrespective of what they're doing, where they're doing it, or the type of contractual arrangement through which they're doing it, should be paid below the minimum wage. That all workers should be protected from foundational risks that arise from the work that they're doing, that they're provided with clear and understandable contracts, that decisions about them can be fairly appealed, that there are meaningful anti-discrimination policies in place, and that they have access to some form of collective representation. Each one of these 5 principles, it's divided into 2 thresholds. And this allows us to award a score of up to 10 out of 10 to any platform that can evidence each one of those thresholds. The way that we collect data is through a triangulation of methods. So we start with desk research. We map out the platform ecosystem in major cities. And important here, what we do is we analyze the publicly available contracts, the terms and conditions, the platform interfaces. On top of that, we speak to workers. We do worker interviews with workers on the platforms, and then we speak to the managers of platforms. So we go to them with a draft score. We ask them for evidence in areas where they think that they deserve a point, where they haven't currently got one. Now, what's important about these manager interviews is that they're not just a moment for data gathering. They're also a point of negotiation. So what happens frequently is that companies ask us what they need to do to not just give us evidence, but what they need to do to make a change to get the score that we're talking about. And a lot of that impetus to make changes comes about because of the league tables that we publish each year in each country. So what we do in the league tables is we directly compare the scores of every platform against every other platform. And this allows consumers, workers, regulators to see that the platform economy isn't black or white. There are shades of gray. It allows us to point to actually existing implementations of the Fair Work principles with specific platforms. And doing that shows that low pay, exploitation, dangerous working conditions aren't just accidents. They're not any sort of natural outcome of the digital economy. They don't just happen. They're choices that are made by societies, governments, users, and companies. And they show us that there's still really a lot to be done. So all of this really provides the incentive for companies to improve their scores and therefore the quality of their jobs. So on this slide, what we have done is list some of the impacts that we've had as a project. So to date, we've encouraged 33 platforms to make 102 changes to policies. Companies are usually very reluctant to reveal exactly how many workers that they have on their platforms, but I think very conservatively, we'd estimate that these changes have impacted the lives of hundreds of thousands of workers. What we've also seen in the project is also that our impacts accumulate and speed up over time. So we almost always get more impacts in a country in the second year than a first, more in the third year than the second, and so on. And I think this is because we really invest a lot of energy in telling our story in the media. So we have a brilliant comms team, and we've now logged over 550 moments of media coverage of our work around the world. So just some examples of the changes that we've persuaded platforms to make through our approach. On fair pay, we've gotten 3 platforms to pay a local living wage and 1 global cloud platform to make sure that workers cannot earn below their local minimum wages. On fair conditions, we've had some success working with companies to get them to audit and to monitor working conditions, and introducing sickness insurance schemes that function as a safety net for workers. On fair contracts, we have gotten companies to translate contracts into local languages, change contracts to be governed by local law, and provide workers advance notice for changes. On fair management, we've worked with 8 platforms to formalize or improve an appeals process and 14 platforms to implement anti-discrimination policies. And on fair representation, we've worked with 6 platforms to publicly signal their willingness to negotiate with a union or association once one gets formed. And we've worked with 1 company to develop a system in which a worker representative can be elected to negotiate with management. So I really hope that these impacts are just the beginning. I hope that we can keep building on them. If our scores tell us anything, it's just how big of a gap there currently is in most countries between the experiences of workers and minimum standards of fair work. And so that gap is also why we've convened this summit. At Fair Work, what we believe is that no worker, irrespective of where they are, how they're classified, or what they're doing, should have a job that isn't characterized by minimum standards of fair work. And so hopefully together what we can do is find ways of moving policies and practices towards those minimum standards. So I'd like to close by thanking our global team in 39 countries. You can see all of the team members listed on this slide. All of the impacts that we've achieved are really thanks to the hard work of these brilliant colleagues. And thanks to all of you listening for joining the summit today, for helping us make progress towards a fairer future of work. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the summit.
Professor Graham, for your remarks and for showing us that fairer working standards on digital platforms are indeed possible. So we will now turn to the first of today's 2 panels, entitled The Status Quo of the Global Platform Economy, Workers' Prospect or Peril, where we will map out the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead when it comes to platform worker rights. To explore this, we have an expert lineup of speakers from a range of geographical and organizational backgrounds. Representing State Secretary Ms. Lillian Chan, we have Anna Dujic, Director General of the Policy Lab Digital Work and Society at the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. We also have Dr. Janine Berg, a senior economist at the International Labour Organization. We have Laura Garcia, Courier Protections and Benefits Lead at the food delivery app Globo. And finally, we have Bill Muturo, Assistant General Secretary for the Transport Workers Union in Kenya. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind the audience at home that you can submit questions and comments to our panelists at any time using the Q&A tool, and we will make time towards the end of the session to address your questions directly to the speakers. So without further ado, let's begin. Dr. Berg, in your role at the ILO, you oversaw the publication of the 2021 World Employment and Social Outlook on the role of digital labor platforms in transforming the world of work. You found that in the past decade, there has been a 5-fold increase in the number of digital labor platforms. Given the scale of change you identify, What are the main takeaways when it comes to both the positive and negative effects of the platform economy, especially when it comes to platform workers? And building on the findings of that report, where does the ILO see the need for action?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for organizing this wonderful seminar. These moments of social dialogue, as we say in the ILO, when we bring the tripartite social partners together to discuss what are some of the challenges we're facing in the world of work, are so important for getting the correct policies in place. And just before I get started, I just want to announce that in October here at the ILO, the week of the 10th of October, we will be having a tripartite meeting of experts on decent work in the platform economy. So this is a real important step forward on how we can be constructing positive policies to make the most out of the platform economy, both for business and for workers. So the ILO, my colleagues and I, and it's not just been myself, but it's been a group of us, have been actively researching the platform economy really since 2015, within the work that we were doing on non-standard employment, because we saw this as really a new type of non-standard employment. In some ways, it had a lot of attributes of casual work from the past, but quite different. And although the numbers, when you look at, although there's been an incredible increase in the size of the platform economy, the numbers of people involved, some would argue are still relatively small if you compare it to total employment. But it's an important area for the ILO and for others to be engaged, because we see this as transforming the world of work and having a potential in many industries. Hence the need for research, but also the need for policy action in this area. It's important for business because we want to make sure that when business is conducted fairly, that is something that other businesses will then thrive for. We need a fair environment for businesses. It's important for workers because we want to make sure that these new jobs that are created are actually decent jobs. The ILO has existed for 100 years. Labor laws have been in place for over 100 years, and all that important progress in ensuring that people have labor and social protections at work need to be carried through into the platform economy. And of course, this is an important area for governments because there is the potential for adverse societal effects if there isn't regulation put in place. So even we see this in areas such as congestion, when we see more taxis taxis or Uber type vehicles on the streets, potential problems in housing, the sustainable social security system. There's a range of issues that need to be addressed and that need to be studied in order to put the right policies in place. I really appreciate, and I think my other colleagues at the ILO really appreciate the work that has been done by the Fairwork program, because it's really demonstrating what are the right steps forward. What can platforms do to ensure that some of the concerns that workers have in the platform economy are addressed. So this is a really important work because it also influences regulatory action. We see that since the rise of digital labor platforms, there has been a lot of movement in the judiciary with legal cases, and that actually, what that says really is that there is a need for policies, because right now we have something new. It doesn't particularly fit in the old mold. That doesn't mean that you throw out all of the laws before, but it does mean that there needs to be some sort of active response. There needs to be a societal decision on what should be done. We need to step back as a society, using social dialogue, getting the points of view of enterprises, of trade unions, of civil society, of governments, and see, what as a society do we want this platform economy to be? What type of jobs do we want to have created? And I think when we think of it from that perspective, we can then move better forward on deciding what course of action we should be taking. So forums such as this one are really important for moving forward in that regard. I know we're going to have a lot of a back and forth in the roundtable. I just want to talk about two issues. So, I mean, the big challenges that we see, on the one hand, we have those platforms that operate in a geographic space in situ, such as the delivery platforms, the Uber type transport vehicles, and some of the care economy type platforms. And on the other hand, you also have the online platforms. Now, most of the legal movement has been around the in situ platform work. Yet online work has much greater potential for growth, and it also poses many more difficult challenges from a policy perspective. A specific jurisdiction can more easily regulate work that's being conducted, within its geographic boundaries. But when it comes to the online work, we have the challenges of a platform located in one country, perhaps a client located in another country, and a worker located in a third country. And this has always been something that's been difficult to regulate. From an international perspective, even at the ILO, the model has been that we pass international labor standards, but then countries adopt them. International governance there are fewer examples of it. There are examples, but of course it is much more challenging. That doesn't mean that it's insurmountable, however. So one of the good role models that we have is the Maritime Labor Convention, which regulates the maritime industry and the working conditions of seafarers. It establishes minimum conditions for seafarers across the world. So that is a positive example. Another positive example is the experience of the Ombuds Office for the Crowdsourcing Code of Conduct that was set up in Germany with the German Crowdsourcing Association and IG Metall. This has served platforms that are workers working within Germany, but also outside of Germany, and is also another promising step forward. So I think I'll close here. What I just want to say is there are a lot of challenges for workers, specifically in terms of dispute resolution is a big issue, sometimes unfair pay, dismissal. Those are all issues that we've that have been well documented both in the ILO research, but also research by academics and others. But what we are seeing, and which I think is the most promising, is that now really we are in a stage where we're having forums such as this, but even more institutionalized forums to move forward to see how can we regulate this new form of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baer, for those insightful comments. We now turn to Anna Dujic from the Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, who is representing State Secretary Ms. Lillian Chan. Ms. Dujic, the Social Democrat-led German Labour Ministry has been engaging with the challenges associated with platform work in Germany in the last legislative period. Minister Heil's 2019 key issue paper on fair work in the platform economy took stock of the current situation in Germany and found that whilst platforms can offer opportunities for workers, we need greater protections for the self-employed in this sector. So in light of the key issue paper, could you elaborate on the current situation of platform workers in Germany, and particularly on the potentials and challenges you see? And in your view, what are the next steps in Germany, and what roles should the private and public sector play?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to take part in this discussion today, and I look very much forward to hearing your insights. For us, your findings and your work is of great importance. They provide the necessary research on current trends and developments in the platform work, research that we need for developing our line of policymaking, but also they are a valuable contribution to the current public debate on how platform work should be shaped in Germany and beyond in the future. I would like to start with some remarks on our approach regarding platform-mediated work in Germany and why we think that it is of great political importance for us to tackle that issue, particularly within this still relatively recently elected new progressive coalition. Our ministry, the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, has led several constitutions with different stakeholders, from civil society, platform workers, platform as well as academia and science, on the challenges platform work may pose, as well as on possible regulations with regard to platform work. These results are combined in the already mentioned key issues paper named Fairwork in the Platform Economy that has been published by our minister in December 2020 and which is until today the guideline of our work. The figures currently available suggest that despite the wide range and large numbers of platforms that exist, platform-mediated work is not yet a mass phenomenon here in Germany. And for now, it represents mostly a second we need to tackle issues regarding platform work, even though the total number of people working on platforms is still relatively unclear. First of all, for us, platform work offers significant opportunities for companies, for consumers, but also for those who work in the platform economy. Secondly, platform work is developing rapidly and is becoming more and more important. The general expectation is that platform work will continue to grow and that this could take place very dynamically, and platforms may fundamentally change the way work is organized. They might have the potential to trigger far-reaching changes to our economy, to the, let's say, business and export model that has been relatively successful so far. And that's why we have to focus on the developments that are currently taking place. And we have to take a very close look on how it will affect the labor force in, for us, the largest labor force on the continent. The third point is that platforms have a tendency to establish dominant or monopoly positions in the market. This is an inherent part of the platform business model and is structural in nature. The more range a platform has, the better it is at matching supply and demand. And consequently, platform markets are characterized by M&A. When we look at the specific German situation, we can observe that there are various different models of platform work. Work in the gig economy, like food delivery or house cleaning, has a different character as maybe freelance work via platform as a designer or software engineer. So we do believe that there is not just one type of platform work. Gig work is different from highly qualified freelance work. So consequently, we are not in favor for a one-size-fits-all solutions, but we try to look at the specific needs of platform workers throughout the so-called value chain of the platform economy. Of course, we will not accept if platforms try to declare platform workers who should be considered employees falsely as self-employed and thus deprive them of their legal status and their legal rights. Our aim is therefore to give self-employed workers in the platform economy access to basic protective measures under labor and social law. And in this context, I want to extend a big thank you to our colleagues from the ILO. We work very closely on that matter. Platform workers are often unable to provide for their retirement independently with the amounts they earn from platform work. Therefore, we plan to include self-employed platform workers in the statutory pension insurance, and we also plan to involve the platforms in the payment of contributions. So this is the current position that we are following, and we are very much looking forward in this context to the negotiations on the EU level that we will accompany very constructively, but also ambitiously, I may say so.
Thank you, Ms. Dujic. I'd just like to quickly remind you all at home to submit your questions to the panelists using the Q&A tool. We will be giving our speakers a chance to respond to those questions directly in a short while. So in collaboration with Fairwork, the food delivery site Globo recently introduced its Couriers Pledge, which aims to improve working conditions for workers where the company operates. As a result, almost 240,000 workers could benefit from improved earnings as well as better safety and management protections. Ms. Garcia, as career protections and benefits lead at Globo, you are deeply involved in the implementation of this pledge. What are the main challenges you have identified in developing this work across the world? And considering these observations, what role do you believe platforms can assume here? What kind of actions or support would be needed from different stakeholders, like our panelists today, to implement projects like the Couriers Pledge and even more far-reaching programs?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think we have a common point here because we also miss these regulations in the countries where we are. Globo is a very global country and is present in 26 countries that are very different one from other. Like, for example, we are in Kenya, we are in Kazakhstan, we are in Spain, and these countries have different regulations, and we don't have a regulation for gig workers, no? And that's why we launched the pledge, in fact. And we were very inspired for the Fairwork work, and we wanted to create some standard for all of our countries and every single courier that delivers in this country, that follows kind of a standard for increased protections and benefits. And that's why we created the pledge. And I think this is a good example of a program that can be globally implemented in many countries. Regarding the challenges that we faced, there are many. One is this lack of regulation that fits this new business model, because also the business model must be sustainable to keep with the flexibility and the way of working that the couriers like as well. I mean, they like this flexibility and this new gig working, but also like making them fair pay, having, for example, sickness leave or parental leave. These are kind of safety protections as well. These are kind of the benefits that the pledge is offering. And well, this would be a first point that I would have liked, and that I think it's very relevant that we have this kind of discussion with you, because I think you can help us to create these regulations. And another point is like the big corporations, that I think they are missing here, because they can help us also to create pools of benefits to the couriers. For example, this sickness support and this parental leave that we have implemented in the pledge is part of the insurance industry. We partnered with Cover and CHAP, which are part of the industry players, and they had to innovate in their processes to create this kind of benefits, because we couldn't do it with the current laws in the countries. So this is something that we also miss, and that I think you can help us to involve the big corporations here to create these new benefits that are available for the gig workers, not only for the couriers, but also for the house cleaning, or even though these freelancers that you were mentioning before. And I think these are the points.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. The digital economy in Kenya has boomed in recent years. And as we have seen across the world, the impact of a growing platform economy in the country has been mixed. Drawing on your incredible experience as the Assistant General Secretary of the Transport Workers Union in Kenya, Mr. Muturo, could you tell us what are the most pressing issues for gig workers in Kenya? And from your point of view, what is hindering the implementation of better standards in the Kenyan platform economy?
Thank you so much once again for this opportunity. My name is Bill Mtoro from Transport Workers Union Kenya. We are a labor organization representing rights, promoting and protecting wages and working conditions for workers in both road and air sectors of transport. So the gig economy in the context of transport sector, we know it is majorly within ride-hailing sectors, and also food delivery and also courier services are one of the trends that are currently, we are currently witnessing in this sector. So just to begin with, there's a saying in African that when Uber came in Kenya, that was around in 2015, drivers were eating chicken. And then as time went by and other platforms also joined into the industry, drivers started eating like chicken, because now the platform.
Okay, we seem to have lost Bill. So I think we will perhaps go to some questions from the audience and pose those to our panelists, and hopefully we'll be able to get Mr. Muturo back on our screen shortly. So our first question from the audience is for Anna Dujik.
Pardon? Can you hear me?
Do we have Mr. Muturo back? Great.
Are you able to
Fantastic.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Continue from where you were.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I was talking about the challenges that are facing drivers, and I've segmented them in terms of wages and working conditions. If you look, for example, at wages, the wages are very low because the pricing models of these platforms, they are working to the detriment of the drivers. They do not consider the cost of fuel. They do not consider, certain issues, like, for example, in the context of Nairobi, Kenya, there's a lot of traffic jam, and before this drivers comes to pick you, he has to cover a lot of distance and also time. But then, unfortunately, the pricing rates do not take into account such. Also, under wages, there's the aspect of high promotional discounts, which are really affecting the drivers. And this is one of the strategies that the platforms are using to attract customers. Then, of course, also there's the issue of commission, which is also it's extremely high, 25 to 30% of the total wages for the trip. That is quite high. In terms of working conditions, there are rampant deactivations and suspensions, and unfortunately, also in line with this is that there are very weak mechanisms for grievance handling and also dispute resolution. Also, if you look at the ILO decent work agenda, the working conditions do not match the ILO decent work agenda. For example, if you talk about social dialogue, it is drivers can be able to organize on one side, but then if there's no willingness from the part of the platforms to negotiate or engage in social dialogue, then the efforts become zero. Also, in terms of working conditions, there's lack of access to social protection. You find that unlike workers who are in formal employment in this sector, unlike those workers who are in formal employment, you find that workers in this sector lack access to health insurance that is contributory, or even social security. So those are some of the challenges that are currently facing workers in this sector. And worst of all, it is the nature of state and the kind of policies that the state wants to give a priority. Thank you.
That was Mr. Bill Maturo, Assistant General Secretary of the Transport Workers Union in Kenya. We will now go to some questions from the audience. So our first question is for Ms. Duyik. Ms. Duyik, you said in your presentation that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to tackling the issue of workers' rights in the platform economy. But there is also no regulation of single platforms. How do you balance this dynamic between shared concerns amongst platform workers in different sectors, while also paying specific attention to the issues that might affect one platform worker in one sector when compared to a different sector?
Thank you for this question. Well, our report on potential solutions for working conditions in the platform economy, like you mentioned, stresses the fact that there are different business models, and we can see a dynamic in regard with those business models and the ways platforms engage or not engage with their platform workers. The dynamic situation in the platform economy demands public but also political attention, and we want to encourage also with forums like this one today a public debate on these issues. It is important to us to address the challenges with regard to platform work, not just on a national but on a supranational level as well, and particularly with regard to the fact that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. All the more we cannot resolve it on a merely national level, but we need an international context. The current political proposal by the EU Commission for a directive on improving working conditions in the platform work is to us an important file in this regard. The German government supports the Commission's initiative in principle and will accompany it constructively. It contains, in our view, important elements which can contribute to improve the situation of persons performing platform work. We agree in principle with the key elements of the proposed directive in terms of content, in particular with the creation of a rebuttable presumption of an employment relationship. We also welcome the draft guidelines by the Commission clarifying the application of EU competition law to collective agreements of solo self-employed people seeking to improve their working conditions. And this includes those working through digital labor platforms. But Europe is not the only arena that seems to be well set to discuss questions with regard to platform work. For example, as I mentioned already before, the ILO could play and already does play an important role. I believe that the report by Global Commission on the Future of Work that has been published 3 years ago offers a good starting point for further debate. We are looking forward to exploring with all of you the subject further. I think we have not found the final answers to all the questions that have been discussed here today. But with regard to the private sector, let me make one final remark. We think it is very important to help initiatives of platform workers and trade unions to negotiate with platforms about fair working conditions. Platforms need to take up their responsibility as employers and in our view, collective rights and collective bargaining systems are central to shaping fair platform work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Duyuk, for your response. Our next question is for Ms. Garcia. The audience participant asks, I would like to thank Laura for her comments and ask her a question about the concept of pooled benefits. Is the idea that different gig platforms would contribute to a shared benefits pool and therefore recognizing that many workers work on multiple platforms?
I see this as a possible option. I mean, we could create more bargaining power if we are more platforms interested in having these pools of benefits, and then the big corporations such as the insurance players or the banks or the learning institutions help us to create new products to these gig workers, because the world how it is now has not this B2. The world is divided between B2B and B2C products, but there's no space for these freelancers and gig workers products. And I think there's a big room of improvement on this. And as the same way this insurer partner has changed their products to adapt to the gig economy, the banks could do the same to help to finance credit or something to the gig workers. Also, I mean the health industry as well, to create more health products in countries where the social security network is not very good, and so on and so forth. And this is what we are trying to do. We are also collaborating, for example, with the FIA, the Federación Internacional Automóvil, for safety issues, and also with Wage Indicator. Wage Indicator is another global company, that organization, it's not a company, that is helping us to know what are the fair pay in every single country where we are operating, including the fuel costs as well, Bill.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. We also have a question for Bill Matoro. As I'm sure you're aware, we have seen many successful campaigns in cities across the global north. How do we increase solidarity between campaigns such as yours in Kenya in the global south and these burgeoning platform worker movements in the global north as well?
Thank you so much once again for your question. And even before I respond to that, I remember initially you had asked me about the issue of implementation of labor standards. Just to give a case in point is that currently in Kenya, the government has come up with the regulations which are actually gazetted. So those are the current regulations that are governing ride-hailing sector in Kenya, and it's only ride-hailing. It does not speak about food delivery. But then from where we sit as a union, we appreciate, because it is a great initiative towards building a regulatory framework within this sector. And as a union, we hope to leverage on those regulations to ensure that we achieve better wages and working conditions for our members. And I also hope that other governments also going to adapt the same, and let us have a regulatory framework for this sector, so that it can be clear on where and how can we now engage in social dialogue. Now, in terms of building global solidarity, one thing I want to appreciate so much is the fact that as a union, we are investing a lot in research, because for you to engage in positive social dialogue, for you to engage in positive collective bargaining, you need to have ground, solid based arguments backed by data, backed by science. So research is one of the most critical tools, especially also the fact that this is a new world of work, which our labor laws are outdated, the policies and the structures for collective bargaining are outdated. So research is important, and this research should not only be, per country, but we should adopt, in fact, a comparative.
I think we might have a slight issue with Mr. Muturo's internet connection. While we are trying to sort that out, we can move to another question from our audience, which is for Dr. Janine Berg. Our audience member asks, what are the main differences? Obviously, you referenced in your talk that the ILO has a very long and powerful history of campaigning for changes to working conditions and improving the rights of workers around the world. What are the main differences you have found in the ILO in lobbying for change in platform work as opposed to more traditional industries?
Effective global solidarity.
Okay, we have Mr. Muturo back. Sorry, continue, Mr. Muturo, with your answer.
Okay, apologies for that. Yeah. So previously I was talking about the importance of the institutional framework of ILO, especially in terms of providing technical support to both the unions, government, and also the enterprises or the platforms, so that both of us can be able to sit down on a table and be able to negotiate. So those are my few remarks concerning building global solidarity and the way forward in which you can be able to champion for the rights of workers in platform sector.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muturo, for that powerful contribution. I'm going to go to that question that we had for Dr. Janine Berg, and I'm going to just repeat it. So our audience member asks, what are the main differences you have found as the ILO in lobbying for change in platform work as opposed to more traditional industries?
Okay, well, we don't lobby for change. We support our constituents in bringing about positive change. I think what we've seen, probably the hardest or the more difficult issue with the platform economy is, and this is especially true with online work, is that it's dispersed. It's dispersed across countries, or even in the work that is the delivery platforms or the drivers. Again, it's a few companies that are all over the world. So I think that makes it harder for the reasons that Laura was talking about, that there's so many different regulations in countries, and then these regulations are not exactly fit for purpose for what's happening in the platform economy. So there's a lot of challenges in the sense of, even if we are asked by our constituents to support, let's say, in a social dialogue discussion in a particular country that wants to change, we can do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever decision is taken in one country will be the same decision taken in another country. And that's exactly for the same reasons that the representative from the German government said there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Even though the platform economy the different platforms have a lot of similarities and a lot of the workers face a lot of the same issues, all the platforms are set up differently. They have different codes of conduct, they have different practices. So all that makes things difficult. So that's why, just reverting back to my initial comments, I really think that we need to, instead of kind of, chasing the tail, we need to start off with really saying, what is it that we want to achieve wherever we are or globally? And then if we have that perspective on, these are our goals, this is what we want to achieve, and then come up with policy solutions based on where we want to go, that perhaps can be a productive step forward. And so I'm hoping that in the discussion in October amongst the social partners, that will be the way that the discussion will go forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berg. I also have another question that I wanted to give to Ms. Dujic. I found it quite interesting. You mentioned in your talk that platforms are having impacts on the broader world of work, even if the number of platform workers in Germany is relatively small at this stage. Could you elaborate on some of the ways the rise of platform work is having knock-on effects on the rest of the labour market in Germany, even for those who are not necessarily working on platforms at this particular moment?
Sorry, because we can't hear you.
Oh. They can't hear me?
Now, yes.
Oh, you can hear me. Great. Okay, will repeat my question. I had a question just for Ms. Dujic. You mentioned in your talk, I found this quite interesting, that platforms are having impacts on the broader world of work, even if the number of platform workers in Germany is relatively small at this stage. Could you just elaborate on some of the ways the rise of platform work is having knock-on effects on the rest of the labour market, even for workers that aren't working on platforms at the moment?
Yes, I think if we trust in the assumption that the platform economy will change dynamically, we have to assume, particularly as an export-oriented, highly diversified industrial economy, that it will affect almost every part of our current value chain in one way or the other. So we see what happened in the food delivery market, which is, of course, a very tiny portion of economy and services. But for instance, the whole healthcare sector, the sector of automotive production, and various other parts of so-called old classical economy might be affected by the new dynamic effects of platform work, meaning we will leave the traditional form of industrial production, which will be based in one place and then will also locate the workers in that same place, but we will transfer to a more diversified way of industrial production, which means various parts of a product will be produced in different places under different conditions and will be delivered to a third place. And so here in Germany, we are already closely observing these developments, also in the automotive industry, but as well in others. And we are wary of potential effects that the dynamic development of the platform economy might have for more classical parts of a big industrialized economy.
Thank you so much for that insightful commentary. And on that note, that is it for the first panel of today. I would like to thank our panelists once again for their time and reflections. And I would also like to thank you all at home for your thoughtful and insightful questions. We now turn to our second panel of the day on looking ahead, policy options for global standards of fair work in the platform economy. Joining us for this panel, we have another exciting lineup. And again, I'd like to remind those watching at home to use the Q&A tool for any questions or comments they would like to direct to our speakers. From the EU Commission, we have Ms. Anna Benčík, Deputy Head of the Future of Work Youth Employment Unit in the Directorate General for Employment. We also have Professor Balaju Parthasarathy, Principal Investigator at Fairwork India, which is based at the International Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore. We have Matthias Weber, Director of the Competence Center for the Future of Work at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And finally, we have Dr. Sakshi Khurana, a Senior Specialist of Labor, Employment and Skill Development at the Niti Aayog, the premier policy think tank of the Government of India. We will first turn to Ms. Benčík. Ms. Benčík, the European Commission published its directive on improving conditions in platform work, which offered a set of frameworks that member states can draw from in order to protect workers in this emerging economy. Can you firstly provide us with a brief run-through of the key elements of the directive and specify how the Commission plans on enforcing the directive while retaining some positive effects of the platform economy? And finally, given that platforms do not only operate nationally or within the EU, but rather on a global level, what do you see as necessary to set global standards for fair work in this sector?
For this question, and also I'm very glad to be here today in this very interesting event. Just to give you maybe a bit of background, the speakers in the first panel already talked about the rise of digital labor economy across the world. In the EU, we see that as well. There has been a sharp increase in the number of digital labor platforms, a five-fold increase in the income of those platforms within a period of 5 years. And up to 10% of workers in the EU at some stage did some platform work. So it's quite an important and growing phenomenon in the EU. This is creating opportunities for many in terms of gaining additional income, combining work and other responsibilities, and gaining new skills. But at the same time, we see also in the EU quite a number of reports about poor working conditions in different forms of platform work, and also a significant number of court cases in different EU countries concerning especially the employment status of platform workers. Now, many platforms operate across borders within the EU, and there is clearly a case for a regulation or a common approach in the EU for the single market. Therefore, as you said, we issued at the end of last year a proposal for a directive on platform work. This is a proposal of the Commission, so this is not yet the final law. This is now being negotiated by the Member States and the European Parliament. Now, to run you through the directive itself, it has three main elements. First of all, it tackles the employment status classification. We know and that we support also the fact that in the platform economy, we have a lot of genuine self-employed people. However, we also estimate that even as much as 20% of people who are currently classified as self-employed might actually be misclassified and therefore denied the access to worker rights that they should have access to. The proposed directive therefore puts
Seems we are having just some slight connection issues, which hopefully should be resolved shortly. I'd like to remind everyone in the audience that as our panelists are speaking, do feel free to post any questions or comments using the Q&A tool. We will be sure to leave enough time towards the end to direct those questions to our speakers. It's very rare to have so much expertise in one virtual room, so please do make use of the space that we have curated here to really get your questions answered and to put your comments and thoughts forward to our panelists. I'm just going to check in on Ms. Benchik.
Yes, can you still hear me?
Fantastic. Yes, we can hear you, Ms. Benchik. Yes.
So I will continue with the second element of the proposal, which is about algorithmic management tools. We want to ensure that people working through platforms are informed about any automated tools that are used to monitor their work, to make decisions that affect them. We also want to make sure that certain types of data are not actively used by platforms, for example, data on emotional or psychological state. We want to make sure that the platforms do not collect data about private conversations or data while people are not actively engaged in work. Also, platforms would be obliged to ensure some human monitoring of the impact of such systems on working conditions and provide some explanations of such decisions and mechanisms to request a revision and provide adequate compensation in case rights of workers are infringed. What is quite important is that those specific rights, most of them, we want to extend also to the genuine self-employed people, because we think that also for them, the algorithmic management has potentially a big impact on the earnings, on working times, on different aspects of working conditions. So in a way, for the first time in EU labor law, we also tackle the issue of self-employed people and their conditions. Now, a third element is a transparency of platform work. We want to make sure that platforms register, comply with different obligations that are already existing in member states, and provide national authorities with information that is necessary for them to enforce it. You asked me at the beginning, how we think that our law could be enforced effectively. I think this is an important element here, that actually national authorities, which in the end will be responsible for putting this law in practice, have access to the information about the number of platform workers and their working conditions. And last but not least, we also support social dialogue in platform work. We think it's a very important element of improving the conditions of platform workers. We try to do that through the proposed directive by giving representatives of platform workers rights to information, recognizing their right to engage in defense of rights of individual platform workers, facilitating contacts between workers in platforms. I think Janine was mentioning how this new workforce is atomized and people have difficulties contacting each other. We want to put some facilitations in place there. And last but not least, at the same time as the proposed directive, we put forward draft the guidelines on competition law, which will clarify that also the genuine self-employed, solo self-employed, will have the possibility to engage in collective bargaining. Now, to finish, you asked me about the global standards, and indeed, as much as we can try to do within the EU, the platforms are more global than that, and there's quite a lot of things that can be done without regulation or new laws, and the Fairwork Project is a prime example, of how much you can achieve. However, I think since platforms themselves work across jurisprudences and jurisdictions, we as policymakers should do the same. And it's not going to be an easy task. We need to, I think, share a lot of research, share a lot of knowledge and understanding of the local context. But I think it's worth it, because in the end, what is at stake is working conditions of millions of workers, a dynamic sector that should have also legal clarity in order to grow in a sustainable way. Thank you very much for this, and I'm sorry if there were any connection issues while I was speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much for persevering through those connection issues, Ms. Benchik. As I mentioned earlier, the work and ratings of the Fairwork Project have had tangible results in recent years. Some platforms have already implemented changes to improve the situation of workers, which shows that Fair Work is having an impact not only on the private sector, but also increasingly on a political level. Professor Parthasarathy, as the principal investigator of the Fair Work India project, could you tell us more about how Fair Work engages with relevant stakeholders? What are your key learnings that you've taken from this process, and what are the tangible results you have achieved with regard to the private sector and policy space in India?
Thank you. Let me start with the policy sector, and then I'll move on to the private sector. I think, we were, our first sort of policy gong, as it were, was being mentioned in Parliament. The work of Fair Work found mention there. And subsequently, what we did was we made a submission to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Communications and Information Technology. Now, the Parliamentary Standing Committee is a committee that is composed of members of Parliament from both houses and cuts across parties, right? And so we made a submission, and we were invited to make a closed-door presentation before them in late August. And I'm very pleased to say that we were the first ever in the country who were invited by the Standing Committee to make a presentation on the gig economy. right? Because that committee covers various issues of policy relevance. I think although the issues that sort of have to govern the platform economy cut across the ministries of labor, for instance, or for example, transport and others, most of the platform companies in India are actually registered as information technology companies. So in a sense, this became the sort of the dominant ministry and the committee attached to the dominant ministry to which we would have to sort of make a presentation. Now, what is actually going to happen next? Our sort of testimony to this committee will find its way into the parliamentary proceedings and will therefore, become will become sort of part of the national record, if you will, and then provide a basis on which sort of legislation will actually be made, right? Will provide a sort of a crucial feedback. Now, to be sure, we are not yet there. The legislation is not there. We've not sort of, but I think we've taken a major step along the road, and I think it is it's sort of really nice to see Fairwork being among the first or the first organization to be invited by the Parliamentary Standing Committee to make a presentation on issues pertaining to gig workers. So that's as far as the other things, of course, when you're talking about like I said, it's a first step, because labor regulation in India is, of course, we have multiple ministries and things like labor are, responsibilities divided between the central government and the state governments. So there are multiple jurisdictions, but I think getting this dialogue going at the central level is a major step. Now, let me actually turn my attention to the private sector, to the platforms themselves. I think there's little doubt that change is going to be slow to come, but it would also be fair to say that our work over the past 3 years, we are now in our 4th year, has provided a sort of a wake-up call to the platforms. As the sort of the first multi-platform, multi-domain, from ride-hailing to foods delivery to beauty services and so on, multi-city and multi-year study. In a sense, we can, I guess, reasonably claim to be the largest sort of study of gig workers in the country. We've received extensive sort of press coverage for our work over the past 3 years. And we sort of routinely, we see ourselves getting invited to various fora. And because of that, you also see reactions from the platforms. Let me start with an early one a couple of years ago when Zomato, a food delivery platform, the day after our results were announced, the scores were announced, the CEO said, we know we had a lot of work to do, but we just didn't realize how much work we had to do, right? So it was a sort of a admission that, okay, these scores mean a lot, and this means that we've got a lot of work to do. Now, I think what we've managed to do sort of by sort of engaging in a significant sort of a dialogue with various platforms and so on, we managed to sort of create an awareness in the public domain. And one indicator of that is that, like Mark pointed out in his introduction, we also talk to platforms, but in year one, just 2 of the 11 platforms that we were studying that year, were willing to talk to us. We've seen more as a nuisance value. But then in year 2, that went up to 4. In year 3, that went up to 6. And in the 4th year, we are now talking to 9 platforms, and they're sort of they're willing to talk to us. And in addition, we've had about 4 or 5 platforms whom we are not able to score this year for various reasons, who've come forward and say, can you score us? Can you tell us whether we're doing the right thing? Right? So we have this sort of the broad sort of awareness of the need to go through this sort of mechanism, and we're seeing this kind of impact on the private sector. And more specifically, if you look at what it is that we've had in terms of, at a platform level impact, we've seen a couple of platforms that are now willing to actually put out policies saying we will provide minimum wage to our workers. We will then provide, certain kinds of sort of work conditions. For instance, the weight of parcels that they deliver, bags, etc., will not exceed a certain amount of a certain number of kilograms. We've also had many platforms that have actually translated their contracts into local languages, because otherwise, first of all, these contracts are in legalese, which I cannot understand. Frankly, I'm not a trained lawyer, and most of these workers surely cannot understand these contracts, especially if they're in English. So we've pushed a lot of platforms to simplify their contracts, to offer them in a variety of regional languages, and in the process also try and reduce some of the asymmetric liabilities that are built into these things. Further, what we've also managed to see is push platforms to ensure that they have better defined processes to for grievance redressal. Because otherwise, you had these sort of helplines, often which didn't work, or things would happen like in 48 hours, 72 hours, you don't know what was going on. So it was a bit of a black hole. So we managed to sort of we've got a few platforms now that are willing to put together, in addition to broadly saying, oh, we have a policy to address worker grievance, saying, okay, tell us what the process is. How long does it take? When will their grievances be addressed? And so on. So we managed to sort of push platforms to have more well-defined processes in this regard. So these are some of the issues. These are some of the broad sort of impacts that we've had. I'll be happy to answer questions later. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your comments. Again, I'd like to remind the audience, if you would like to contribute to the conversation, please do put forward your comments and questions using the Q&A tool. We have some wonderful questions already lined up. I'm going to invite Matthias Weber to add to the conversation. Before I do, I'd just like to remind our speakers, if you could please switch on your camera, particularly if you are yet to speak, so that we can all see you. Some of you here may be familiar with the work of Mr. Weber's organization, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, in this area of the platform economy. And particularly illuminating is the Foundation's Mapping the Platform Economy project, which really provides that bird's eye view of how the platform economy is evolving globally. Mr. Weber, at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, you work closely with workers' associations around the globe. To what extent do you think these worker associations meet the challenges faced by gig workers, particularly when it comes to algorithms and data protection? And what steps are needed to ensure worker voices are truly heard by platforms and policymakers?
Okay, thank you very much, especially for starting, let's say, with a praise of our Mapping the Platform Economy project, which I think is really was worth our while conducting the research. But I have to correct you. Unfortunately, we are we have not been as successful in portraying the global platform economy on a global scale, but rather we had to start somewhere, and so we concentrated on Europe. But still, there's a lot of information that can be found there. For what I'm going to say right now, I still have to put a slight disclaimer on the start, because it was said that I'm in charge of the Competence Center on the Future of Work, which is based in Brussels. But before that, I considerately worked with trade unions in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. So please bear in mind for everything I'm going to say now that of course affected somewhat the perspective or the evaluations I'm going to tell you. So if you ask me how are the trade unions faring in the gig economy and the platform economy, bearing in mind I have this heavy emphasis on Eastern Europe, I'm afraid I must say they're not faring too well. At least, if we are talking about the basic trade union organizations. Because it will not surprise you, I guess, if I say that it is mainly the bigger trade union organizations out there with better resource endowments, that's knowledge-wise, but also with regard to their financial endowments, that actually have started to tackle the platform economy, or let's say the broader complex of the digital transformation of the working world. So when I say this, I mainly think about the bigger trade union organizations in Western Europe with a long tradition, a long history. And it's also mainly, I dare say, trade union organizations coming from the private service sector and their European branch federations that have been either going forward with collective agreements or actually just starting with generating some expertise in the field. I want to go or talk about really superficially about some immediate steps that either policymakers or trade unions can undertake, and this is somewhat going to be a repetition of what Ms. Banchik already has said, because a lot of good things are being tackled by the directive. I want to give some praise back, to the European Commission at this point, because it's high time that the platform economy is going to be regulated to some extent, and I think that the direction is going in a lot of really good ways, or in a good direction about that. But maybe take a step back first. I'm not sure if that was already addressed in the first panel, but what we as the Competence Center usually do is start with what we call some myth busting, or what is at the center of this is starting with a narrative, because for the last, I don't know,
we are once again suffering for some slight connectivity issues there. While we're waiting for Mr. Weber's connection issues to sort themselves out, I'd once again like to invite you all to post some comments and questions in the chat. We already have some fantastic questions on holding companies accountable for algorithmic management systems, bringing up that question of data transparency. We have some questions about the link between platformization and casualization. We have some great questions on the EU directive as well, which I'm very excited to hear our panelists respond to. We have Mr. Weber back now, so if you'd like to pick up where you left off.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. So I was with the narrative. I just got to briefly sum that point up as I think that growth of the platform economy does not equal social progress, nor does it equal technological innovation, because that is a narrative I have seen very prominently at play in the Eastern European countries, in the sense that governments usually said, this is something that is new and that is good for our economies. Let's not touch it. The easier it can develop, the easier it is. But it's, I'd say, quite the contrary, in that unregulated growth of the platform economy usually comes with heavy social costs. I think Mrs. Banchik either directly addressed it or mentioned that, because with low wages that are connected with the platform economy, and also missing out on social rights and social security that's connected to the employment status, means that these burdens that actually the platforms are supposed to carry are shifted upon the society or these national economies as a whole. So what can be done, what should be done, is that firstly, we are also, as a Competence Center, calling for a register where all the platforms are supposed to inscribe, because this provides transparency about where these platforms are active in, which sectors they are active in, do they have some trans-border activities, how many employees do they have, how many self-employed are active on these platforms, because that in turn allows trade unions to actually come up with a plan under given, certain resource endowments or resource constraints, which platforms to tackle first, for example, and make a plan on that. And it's good to say, or you can easily see on our mapping project, that already there are actually a couple, only a selected few of countries, Belgium, for example, and France and Portugal, that started to create these registries. A next step, or rather perhaps a complementary step, Ms. Banchik already mentioned that as well, is collective negotiations, or gaining collective agreements between the social partners. So we already have a couple of collective agreements being being in place in Europe as well. Austria, the Nordics, excluding Finland, and also prominently in Spain. But this comes with, I'd say, two heavy conditions in the European Union. The first condition right now still is that collective agreements can only be concluded by regular dependent employees, for which then there are workers' associations or trade unions out there that are legally allowed to conclude these collective agreements. And of course, the second condition is you as a trade union organization or you as a workers' association, you need to have the power to actually conclude, to enter negotiations with the platforms, with the employers, and command a considerable number of active trade union members that are willing to go on strike, willing to enter the conflict, so that you can actually conclude this collective agreement. And both of these conditions can be seen as problematic, because it was already pointed out that most of the platforms do not understand themselves as regular employers, and therefore saying, well, we do not have to conclude any collective agreements because the people providing the services on our platforms, they are self-employed. There's no need for that. And secondly, tied to that, if they are self-employed, it's very difficult for the trade unions to actually reach out to them because they're not supposed to organize the self-employed. And also, even more so due to the very business model of these platforms that usually operate mainly electronically, mainly virtually, unions are facing quite a hard time of accessing the service providers on these platforms, because in contrast to regular corporations which own a workplace where all the workers are coming together, there is no joint workplace for the platforms. So the unions are facing quite difficult circumstances to actually get access to these workers. So this is what I would call a technological isolation, which still can be addressed by technical solutions as well from the unit side. For example, there might be, or you can conceive of browser plugins that allows these workers to connect and to talk to each other securely so they can come up with a plan. But this is something that needs to be discussed way more within the trade union landscape. And thirdly, I'm just going to strive that, but it's also been mentioned by Ms. Banchik, there is the algorithmic management, which is at the very center of the business model of the platforms. But the problem is, let's imagine for a moment that we have the directive in place, which is a good thing. So the workers are supposed to have transparency about this algorithmic management, the way they work, the way they work with data, which kinds of data. What is then to be done by the workers that have access, that have transparency by it? Because I have to say, in my experience, most of the unions, the basic trade unions organizations that I know that are being out there, are lacking what is usually called digital literacy. So when they have access to this kind of information, what is then to be done with it? And this is something we regularly discuss with the European federations as well, and try to provide training on that, because at the moment, they have this kind of information, they need to act on it. And right now, most of them wouldn't even know how to act on it. So this is, let's say, to conclude my short remarks, my short points. I use this opportunity to make some advertisement as well. If you are interested in the best practice examples, the cases that I mentioned, please feel free to go to our homepage and look into that mapping platform economy project, because that's open for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weber, for your insight. I would finally like to turn to Dr. Khurana. This year, your organization, Niti Aayog, published a report on India's booming gig and platform economy and proposed different ways to specifically engage more women in the gig economy. Could you elaborate on the main risks that women gig workers are facing and how these challenges are being addressed in India? Have you found any exemplary practices being deployed in other countries in order to address these gender dynamics in the platform economy?
Thank you so much for inviting me for this panel. As you mentioned in the beginning, Niti Aayog is the think tank for the government. And we have recently come up with a report on India's booming gig and platform economy, which highlights both the opportunities that this sector presents as well as challenges faced by workers. We have also illustrations of examples across the globe of good initiatives which different organizations have undertaken or different governments have undertaken in various countries, so that we can draw appropriate learnings from these examples. Our report also takes into account Fairwork's work on ratings of different platforms. So thank you, Professor Parthasarathi, for that. So talking about women's, the barriers that they face for entering this platform, or the risks that they face. So as was mentioned by our previous speaker in the panel, that digital literacy is a major barrier for women. We have one of the surveys, the GSMA Mobile Gender Gap Report, that points out that only 25% of women compared to 45% men in India had access to smartphones in the year 2020. So not as many women would have access to smartphones or to internet devices, which is a major requirement for taking up employment in the sector. But at the same time, our work highlights the fact that the sector gives the opportunity to women to transcend work time and workspace. It offers flexibility, which women appreciate. It's also been pointed out by the ILO Global Survey that women acknowledge the flexibility that the platform sector offers. But at the same time, there are risks involved, especially for women to take up work in platforms, in location-based platforms, where they're required to step out of their homes, where they're required to work late at night. So there are concerns of safety. There are concerns of access to toilets, for instance. There are also concerns, as we have already discussed, of irregular earnings. To be able to have good earnings, women need to spend a lot of time working as freelancers, and that can lead to that can affect work-life balance for women. It can lead to greater amount of stress. It can lead to health risks for women as well as for other workers. So these are some of the risks that we highlight and some of the challenges that we highlight for workers and women workers. At the same time, we also looked at certain good initiatives by platforms in India and across the world, initiatives for women in general. For instance, I've been looking at an initiative in South Korea where they're focused on transforming the city of Seoul to make it more worker-friendly for women.
Just having slight connection issues there again. In the meantime, if anyone would like to find out more about the Fairwork Project, do we have Dr. Khurana back? Great, thank you. Continue where you left off, Dr. Khurana.
Yeah. So I was talking about South Korea's example, which is focused on remodeling the city to make it safer for women. We have also highlighted in our report initiatives undertaken by platforms like Uber and Ola in India, which are cab hailing. Ola is also a cab hailing platform in India, which are focused on skilling women and at the same time onboarding these skilled women on their platforms as driver partners. We find that very few women are able to take up employment as cab drivers, as delivery persons, due to concerns of safety, late hours or work, and so on. So initiatives which focus on skill development as well as onboarding women to these platforms are quite encouraging for women. Also, we have talked about initiatives where women can step out and at the same time feel safe, where there can be an alarm system on the app where a worker is going to client's home to offer her services, and if there is an emergency, the worker can quickly press onto the alarm and there's somebody coming out to the rescue of the worker. Also, 24/7 helplines are very important for women workers. More women in the management is very important for platform companies so that women can reach out to help desks, also collectivization for women, as was being discussed by our previous speaker. For workers in general and for women in particular, there needs to be greater networking of women workers so that they can talk to each other, they can share their challenges, and there can be a mechanism for coming up with solutions to problems of women workers. So these are some of the things. Apart from that, also we highlight initiatives of platform companies, municipal corporations, collaborating with resident welfare associations, with residential societies to ensure that there are toilet facilities for women delivery persons, for women cab drivers. Platform companies to partner with NGOs, with civil society organizations to have better initiatives for women workers. Organizations that are onboarding more women to be given fiscal incentives, tax concessions, and generally encouragement from the government. So these are some of the initiatives that we've highlighted in our report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khurana, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. We will now turn to you, our audience, for some questions. For Ms. Benchik, we have two related questions. We have, how can we make companies accountable and transparent about the types of algorithmic management systems they are using and the types of data they are collecting? And what are the EU's plans in this regard? And related to that, GDPR already forbids automated decision-making without human checks. Obviously, that is something that is related to the question of data. How far does this GDPR rule apply already to platforms? And how would the proposed directive on platform work go beyond it and solve the issues of enforcement when it comes to this particular dynamic of platform work?
Thank you very much for the interesting questions. So how to make companies accountable and transparent in the sense of algorithmic management and the types of data. Indeed, this is what we are trying to improve with the proposal. There will be an obligation for platforms, to inform their workers, the worker representatives, whether they use automated systems to monitor work performance, to make or support any kinds of decisions that workers are affected with. So that's already a big step forward. Furthermore, they will also have to inform what types of data, what categories of data are used for this purpose. And again, that is an improvement compared to what we have at the moment. We, in the proposed directive, also try to put together the forces of labor inspectorates and data protection authorities, so that they investigate issues around the use of data and algorithmic management in some kind of collaboration. It's also a bit what Mr. Weber said earlier. There's the big question of digital literacy and the question of who has enough expert knowledge to actually understand how the codes behind those different algorithmic management tools work. We hope that and we recommend to member states to to invest in this capacity, at least in the inspectorates, in the labor inspectorates. We also hope that with time there is going to be a more kind of ex ante involvement of workers and their representatives in setting up such systems. There is a specific article in the proposed directive that obliges platforms to actually consult upfront workers when they want to make some modifications in those systems. And the big platforms will also be obliged to actually chip in to the cost of experts that could support the workers' representatives in actually understanding what those systems do, how they affect workers, and so on. So we hope that with time the knowledge is going to increase, and this is going to get more transparent for everybody, and as a result the companies will be more accountable as well in how they use this data. Now, the second question on the GDPR. GDPR already applies fully to people working through platforms, and we have indeed seen across Europe already some cases which were based on GDPR-derived rights that platform workers or their representatives put to courts in order to defend their rights. What we try to do in the proposed directive is to specify those rights further, complement them to some extent. For example, we say upfront which types of data cannot be collected, like as I mentioned earlier, the emotional and psychological state data. We specify that the platforms have to refrain from collecting data of workers which is generated while off active work, and so on. So there are a few elements which we add. We also add, as I mentioned earlier, this collective element, the ex ante consultation with workers, and the element that I also mentioned of collaboration and cooperation somehow between the labor authorities and the data protection authorities. I hope that replies to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very thoughtful response. I wanted to pick up on that question of digital literacy and direct sort of follow up on that directly to Matthias Weber, where we have a question on, do you think governments should invest in training on labor rights for all these platform workers? And to add on to that, do you think that labor rights should include questions of digital literacy now, given the centrality of these issues now to this emerging world of work?
I think I would rather start, with providing these trainings and these expertise to the workers' associations, not necessarily to the workers themselves. I mean, just imagine how broad the platform economy actually is, and then we have very different sectors that are covered by platforms or platforms' business models. And usually, I would say, find kind of two figures or prominent examples of platform workers out there. And then you have, the rather minority of highly qualified workers that are active in ICT, in the ICT sectors. These are not the people that you actually have to train and qualify on how to further their interests. And then you have rather the bulk of personal services. That might be food delivery, that might be driving. The work are rather tough. There has been a prominent increase in the growth of the platform economy, but there has not been a prominent increase in the wages, the salaries they actually get at the end of it. So, they're kind of barely trying to scrape by, trying to make ends meet, and I wouldn't start with them trying to provide the training there. But usually, if they are regular employees, they should be represented by some kind of trade union, or by some traditional trade union organization in the European Union. So what they need is, firstly, as I said, since they are lacking usually staff, personnel, as well as the expertise, either by projects as we carry out. There's a lot of supporting programs by the European Commission as well, trying to provide some projects in the context, some trainings in the context of one of these projects. She train some trainers with them and get them the opportunity to train other trainers within their organizations. And from that organization, you can go down to the shop level, so to say. So if the unions manage to actually understand these algorithms better, I think that's the easiest way to get a first step of how to create this digital literacy. But it is that is somewhat centered towards how these platforms' business models actually work. There's a lot of more topics or aspects that are part of what is to be considered digital literacy. There's, for example, well, understanding the platform economy as a whole, but also how I strive at kind of how secure communications work. That's another thing. That's not, you know, entirely tied to just the platform economy. But, you know, we have a lot of old-fashioned organizations out there that either think, you know, you can still try and organize your workers by just having a hangout of some sort, a hangout meaning not, you know, the Google Hangout, but just, you know, a piece of paper where you advertise yourself as an organization and get people called to you. I think there's lots of other opportunities that actually trade unions should use in a digital, in a virtual way, so to say, of how to get access, how to contact and then connect to the workers. That is part of digital literacy. That is something I'd say, you know, governments basically should carry out, or that is supposed to be an elemental part of education that is provided through the schools, that every individual has to learn.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weber, for your insights there. So we have two questions here that relate specifically to the platform economy as it exists in India. And I will direct these questions to Dr. Parthasarathi and Dr. Khurana. So the gig economy in India is evolving and expanding. Could you share your thoughts on legislation, the existing legislation governing platform workers? And in light of that, have there been any platforms that have threatened to leave the country if they start to become regulated by the national government? Dr. Parthasarathi, I will start with you, and then I will move on to Dr. Khurana. Dr. Parthasarathi, if you want to interject there.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I'm not aware of any platform that is sort of threatened to leave the country. Maybe there is. I'm certainly not aware. But insofar as legislation is concerned, in the past couple of years, the government of India has collapsed a number of regulations into 4 codes, right? And in one of the codes, the Code on Social Security, there's an explicit mention definition of platform workers and gig workers, right? Which says that, I mean, it's not yet, the details are not exactly fleshed out, but it promises a variety of sort of social security benefits, right? But what's interesting, or what is sort of somewhat disappointing, is that in the other 3 codes, the Code on Wages, the Code on Industrial Relations, and the Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions, gig workers and platforms find no mention whatsoever. And why is this particularly disappointing? Because in our work over the past 4 years, yes, you know, we do know that it's important that workers get, you know, social security, you know, as they sort of continue to work and so on. But the primary concern of workers, right, given that if you look at the demographic profile, most of them are in the 18 to 25 or 20 to 25 age group, as even the Niti Aayog report mentions. Their primary concern is 1, 2, 3, my wages, right? This is what is it that I'm actually going to be taking home, right? That is their primary concern. Yes, a 20 or 25-year-old will certainly start to think about the social welfare benefits, you know, as time goes along. But the fact that that platform workers and gig workers are not mentioned in any of the other 3 codes is both, I think, I would not just say disappointing, but also troublesome. Okay. The other thing is, we do have a platform on which workers are allowed to register themselves. It is called eShram, where you register yourself for various benefits, and you could register under the broader category of what is called organized workers, or you could register as gig workers. And unfortunately, that category of gig workers has also been removed now. So what has happened is we continue to live in a world where we don't exactly know how many gig workers there are in the country, how many platforms there are, what kind of wages people make, etc. So I think the legislation has a very, very long way to go. And I'm not even, this is some of the, based on what the government has already done and has forgotten to do as a consequence. I'm not even starting to sort of scratch the surface about other issues, that pertain to data or algorithms, etc., which could potentially be, which would probably require a lot more.
We have some slight connection issues there again. Whilst we are trying to get Professor Parthasarathy back, Dr. Khurana, do you want to jump in with some of your thoughts in response to those two questions about the existing legislation covering gig workers in India and whether there is a threat that some platforms might leave if they start to become more heavily regulated?
With contributions from workers, from government, as well as the platform companies themselves. So at least the code gives some directions for new initiatives, especially social security initiatives for workers that can be introduced by different state governments in line with the code, in line with what the central government has recommended. So also our report, Professor Parthasarathy mentioned about estimates of workers. So our report estimates, it puts the current estimates of workers to 7.7 million workers, and it also projects that this is going to grow to 23.5 million workers by 2030. Since we want to reach out to different stakeholders through our work, our report talks about initiatives that platforms can also introduce. We talk about examples of social security initiatives that have been undertaken in some countries like Indonesia, in the UK, in the state of California, and initiatives within India, which some platform companies undertook in the context of COVID to offer support to workers. So we sort of urge in our work that initiatives which were undertaken in times of the COVID pandemic situation can actually be adopted for workers throughout by platforms in line with the Social Security Code. So these are initiatives for accident insurance, especially for driver partners, delivery persons. We talk about initiatives for old age pension retirement. We talk about initiatives for coming up with a corpus fund, which platforms can also set up to support smaller micro entrepreneurs associated, linked with the platforms. We also talk about initiatives that the platforms can undertake for different sections of workers, like women workers, persons with disabilities. So that's the kind of recommendations that the report has come up with. As Professor Parthasarathy mentioned, we also have eShram platform introduced by the Ministry of Labour, where different workers, especially informal workers, can register. So what we know is that a large number of gig and platform workers have registered on this platform. So, and the platform aims to have a unified system of social security schemes, and to understand the access of social security schemes to informal workers. So these are some of the initiatives that our report highlights, and really calling out to different stakeholders to come up with unique initiatives for these workers, since this is a category of workers which is not protected, which is it's not a conventional category of workers, not covered under many of the laws. So we've urged platform companies to tie up with insurance companies, with governments, to come up with uniquely designed initiatives for platform workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khurana. I'm actually going to ask another question to you, Dr. Khurana, just to pick up on some of the comments that you said, and it relates to one of the questions that we've also gotten from the audience, which is, could you talk a little bit more about social challenges that women face in Indian cities that restrict mobility, and how this shapes their participation in platform work? And I think the broader question there is there a connection between social rights and labor rights when it comes to the question, particularly of marginalized people participating in the platform economy?
So yes, it is a social issue, the fact that we don't have many women out there in public spaces. So that's why we see more women in freelancing work, which can be done remotely. But these are workers who are educated. For other workers, we see very few women taking up work as driver partners or delivery persons, and that's got to do with concerns of safety, but it's also got to do with the social setup, the fact that the responsibilities of household and care work primarily fall on women. So women, what kind of employment women take up is decided by their normative responsibilities. So that's one reason why women prefer work which can be done remotely from their homes. It's also important that to be able to break these barriers, we have initiatives by platforms that reach out to women, especially younger women, to girls, to train them in skills. Skill training, as we talked about, is very important in this context. Digital skill training in non-traditional skills like driving for women, which is we also do a lot of work in the area of skill development at Niti Aayog. I'm part of a vertical which does a lot of work on skill development. So it's very important that we have training for women in non-traditional roles, so that they're able to break these social barriers, they're able to break stereotypes associated with the kind of work women ought to be doing. So that's where platform companies can come together with other civil society organizations working on women's employment, on women's skill development, and have outcome-based skill training programs for women, skilling women, at the same time onboarding women in platforms where they can have employment, which also offers them some safety in terms of, working late at night or driving a vehicle where they may not feel completely safe. So what can be done? That is something that platforms need to ensure. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our second panel and to the Fair Work on Digital Platforms Summit. I once again would like to thank all our speakers for their insights, commentary, and expertise, and all the work they do to improve the working conditions in the platform economy. I would also like to thank our audience for being part of today's discussions. Before we close, I'd like to hand over to Axel Klapeke, Director of the Division for Economic and Social Development and Digitalization at the GIZ, who co-organized this event along with Fair Work.
I want to thank you for your valuable insights and important discussions today that will pave the way for a fair and inclusive future of the platform economy. I have the pleasure to close the summit, but before doing so, I would like to reiterate some key points. The platform economy is a global phenomenon of digital transformation that does not operate according to national borders. On the one hand, it contributes to shaping a global labor market of the future. On the other hand, it does not yet live up to global standards for decent work, as we have heard today. Therefore, global projects like our joint efforts with the Fairwork are crucial in designing the future of work and the digital economy. The joint effort has not only contributed to reshaping the narrative around decent work on digital labor platforms, it has also provided policymakers, workers and platforms alike with concrete solutions on how to improve working conditions. Most importantly, it continues to demonstrate that platform work can be fair. I believe that by bringing together key stakeholders, as it happened in today's summit, and continuing the important work globally, we will be able to enhance international cooperation and action. GIZ contributes to this goal by strengthening its engagement in and with selected partner countries on behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development via our Gig Economy initiative, as well as continuing our support of the Fairwork Project. Additionally, we are currently developing policy advisory services to provide partner countries with better regulatory frameworks through our 32 digital transformation centers worldwide. I want to thank everyone who contributed to this summit and look forward to continued cooperation among all stakeholders to lift the potential of the platform economy while minimizing its risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Klaphake, and thank you again to our speakers and audience for joining us today. I'm Dalia Gabriel, and I've been your host for today's summit. Goodbye from all of us here in Berlin, and wherever you are in the world right now, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yes.